One of my all-time favorite films is the 1982 sword and sorcery masterpiece Conan the Barbarian, directed by John Milius and starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and James Earl Jones, based on the pulp fantasy character of the same name by revered 1930s Texas-based writer Robert E. Howard. During the time it was released, it was a solid but not amazing box office success, and the critical reception it got was primarily mixed. But it has withstood the test of time, as today it remains one of the most well-crafted, emotional, and epic fantasy films of all time, rivaled only by Peter Jackson's landmark Lord of the Rings trilogy. Its importance cannot be overstated, as it not only launched the career of one of the most famous movie stars of all time, but it showed that traditional fantasy could be a genre that brought in the money, rather than the often imitated science fantasy of Star Wars that was happening at the time. It also introduced a whole new generation of viewers to Howard's amazing fantasy world of Hyboria. Thanks to the efforts of production designer Ron Cobb, who took inspiration from the artwork of Frank Frazetta, the masterful and sweeping cinematography of D.P. Duke Callahan, the operatic and philosophically driven screenplay by John Milius and co-screenwriter Oliver Stone.
What is best in life?
The open steppe, fleet horse, falcons at your wrist, and the wind in your hair.
Wrong! Conan, what is best in life?
To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women.
That is good.
And of course, the timeless and powerful musical score by Basil Poledouris. Howard's Hyborian age leapt from the pages and onto the screen with absolute authenticity, even if the details of Conan's story itself had taken more than a couple of liberties. The presentation of this film, along with Schwarzenegger's understated but effective performance, helped cement the character in pop culture, and it's because of this film, and how much I adore it, that my goal with this video is to analyze how the techniques and details that are not part of the script add to the film's narrative, and create little narratives of their own. I will be spoiling the crap out of this movie, so if you have not seen it yet, I strongly suggest you watch it before watching this video. You have been warned. The major scene I want to break down is the scene where Conan stumbles into the tomb and retrieves the Atlantean sword. This scene operates almost like a short film within the greater film. It opens immediately with a conflict revolving around Conan being chased by rabid dogs. This is what a lot of people like to call the rising action, the inciting incident that starts the plot. The chase itself is pretty well shot and actually quite memorable for being so short. We get a nice high angle looking down at Conan's feet that almost certainly utilized a wide-angle lens. The choice of lens and angle for this shot was likely to help create a sense of fear and panic for the audience to share Conan's fear and panic as he's running from the dogs. We get a great shot as Conan runs past the camera and it pans around him, revealing and establishing the rock formation he's about to climb in a near 180-degree rotation. After that, it cuts to a lengthy shot of the dogs running past the camera, and when we return to Conan, he's already pretty high up the rocks, which is quite a time skip that might not work in a lot of other film scenes. But considering the urgency of this scene, it would make sense that Conan would scale those rocks as quickly as possible, a smart choice on the editor's part. The next few shots are not overly fancy. Conan pulls his chain up, he throws his fur pelt at the dogs, so they'll have something to chew on that's not him, and he falls down into the cave. Fairly standard stuff, but it works well enough. You don't want to be overly showy with how you film movie scenes. Every shot you choose should be made with the thought towards benefiting the story, not your ego. Also, as Conan falls, we get a few of the humorous signature Schwarzenegger grunts and yells. I don't think Schwarzenegger's grunts of pain here were meant to be funny, but all the same, they actually provide a nice bit of levity from the intensity of the previous chase. As Conan looks up at the hole he fell through, we see a small cloud of dust fall through, presumably kicked up by the dogs outside. This small cloud of dust could be seen as the last part of the outside world being let in. Like a gust of wind through a closing door, it helps establish that Conan has entered a whole new world within this cave. We then experience a montage of the various inhabitants of this cave, with old walls and various skeletal remains and random edifices that are intercut with Conan trying to get a fire going. This montage is clearly made to make it seem as if these long-dead warriors are somehow watching Conan as he fumbles about in the darkness. The way this montage is done makes it intentionally hard to see where all these remains are, and to ascertain what exactly the geometry of this room is. Again, as a way of making the viewer feel lost in the dark, like our protagonist. Once our hero finally ignites his flame, we get the reveal of the tomb he is in, and the music reflects this sense of discovery. Once Conan rises to his feet and begins to explore his new surroundings, the camera angles used are high, making Conan look small in this dark, abandoned, older world. One thing to note is that the closer Conan comes to the skeleton of the long-dead king in the room's apex, the larger he appears in the frame, and the more powerful the music becomes. As if every second that passes, he becomes less afraid and more confident in his spirit. We get a great tracking shot of Conan and the head of the dead king in the same frame that moves from left to right before he sees the sword, and then the music crescendos. There's a great bit where the camera tilts down to emphasize the impact of the sword as Conan breaks the rusted scabbard off of its blade. The camera still focuses on the skeletal king as much as possible as Conan is inspecting his new sword, which builds up to the moment where the king's helmet falls and Conan is anointed not only as the new keeper of the Atlantean sword, but also the future king of the world of men. Our hero then invokes the name of his god,
Crom.
He slices off his chain before the final note of the music. And in one simple close-up transition, deals with his canine oppressors. There is more imagination, creativity, and passion put into this one short scene than the entire runtime of many other films. If most directors were handed a scene where a guy travels into a dark and creepy tomb and steals a sword from a skeletal king who then falls over apart in response, they would play it up for horror, or for an exciting action set piece a la Raiders of the Lost Ark, which came out the previous year. John Milius does the opposite. Knowing the fearless and indifferent attitude Conan shows to the unknown in the original short stories, Milius decides to use this scene to trigger a transformation within Conan's soul. Like Clark Kent entering the Forges of Solitude, or Bruce Wayne embracing the swarm of bats, this is a scene where the main character discovers his destiny, where he discovers the man he will be for his entire remaining life. In a way, the skeletal warriors and king in this tomb undergo an arc as well, as if they've been waiting for the right person to come along and claim the sword of their kingdom. Every single element of filmmaking is at work here to create a powerful sense of rising emotions, in contrast with the unsettling locale. It's something people in the filmmaking business like to call mise-en-scène, when the script and all the aspects of the filmmaking synergize to create something special within a film. What the mise-en-scène does for this scene is that it mixes two contrasting tones perfectly. The editing, photography, and set design all convey a macabre and sinister tone, while simultaneously, that same editing and photography as well as the music and Schwarzenegger's physical direction convey a sense of rising hope and determination within our hero's soul. Because of that juxtaposition, we have a brilliantly constructed scene that serves as a microcosm not only for the film, but for the character of Conan himself. In all of his forms, whether it be in films, books, comics, and so on. It harkens back to the Nietzsche quote at the very start, that which does not kill you makes you stronger. When you boil it down, this is a film about a man thrust into a cruel, uncaring, and unforgiving world where the only person he can truly rely on is himself. The only strength he can trust, his inner strength. That is the meaning of the film's constant running question, the riddle of steel. Everyone who ponders its meaning gets it wrong. The answer lies not in weapons or in the flesh, but in the human spirit itself. This is reinforced by the only line uttered in this entire scene when Conan invokes the name of his god, Crom. In both this film and Howard's original stories, Crom is the god of the Sumerian people. As far as fictional deities go, he is quite passive and apathetic, having given nothing to the race of men except one gift, the gift of fury. The power to strive and slay, the ability to retain grit and courage, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. Which makes the context for Conan invoking Crom's name here even more appropriate. He plunges into this dead and decayed kingdom, a scared and confused slave, virtually a child. But then the dead kings of old convey their story to him, and with the gift of his patron god, the Sumerian truly becomes a man, filled with conviction and purpose. The sheer craftsmanship of this scene regarding the music, the shots, the editing, the direction, along with the narrative wealth it showcases despite the use of only one line of dialogue, and how well it encapsulates the meaning of both the entire film and the source material, makes this not only my favorite scene from the film, but just in general one of the all-time greatest scenes in any film ever made. The director, John Milius, intended for this film to be more operatic in its direction, relying on imagery and the body language and facial expressions of his actors to tell the story more than any spoken exposition. In a way, this stylistic choice was made out of necessity, since during the filming of this movie, Schwarzenegger was still somewhat inexperienced as both an actor and as a speaker of the English language, a fact which raised a lot of anxiety and doubts about his own performance. But John Milius, being the professional that he is, improvised by giving Schwarzenegger a very small amount of dialogue, making him act more with his face and his posture. Like Cameron would do with the Terminator movies, Milius squeezed a memorable performance out of the rising star by adapting to and working around his limitations as an actor. But it would be remiss of me to talk about this film without, of course, talking about its incredible and timeless musical score composed by the late Basil Poledouris. There are many reasons why fans of this movie consider its score one of the greatest symphonic film soundtracks ever made. I consider it that not just because each track is memorable and wonderful on its own, not just because it does an incredible job of transporting you into Howard's world, but the main reason for me is that the film's music evolves in relation to the story. For example, let's take the film's most famous piece, Riders of Doom. Bombastic and powerful choral piece that is played a total of 3 times throughout the film's runtime. The first time we hear it is the opening scene when Thulsa Doom's forces attack Conan's village in Samaria and murder his family. I've seen people criticize the way this scene uses the music, saying it would fit more with an epic battle scene than a scene where the main character's family and people are brutally slaughtered, but I feel like they missed the whole point. The booming choir and orchestra play into the sense of panic and terror Thulsa Doom's army instills into the people of the village. The energetic pace of the track juxtaposes nicely with the horrific butchery Doom and his followers dole out to the villagers and Conan's family. It's not exactly the type of ambiance you would expect from a scene like this in a film, but, like the scene in the tomb, John Milius edits the scene and utilizes Polydorus' score in a subversive way that still works brilliantly. The second time you hear Riders of Doom is far later, about a good hour and 20 minutes later in the film. In the scene where Conan and his companions attack Thulsa Doom's lackeys in the orgy taking place within the Mountain of Power. The song is noticeably less intense here than in the opening scene. Both the choir and instrumentation are more subdued. This to me is the film's score symbolizing Conan's resistance and turning of the tables against Thulsa Doom's army. It shows how the good guys are finally beginning to fight back. We also hear the main title theme in an epic but brief fight scene between Conan and Thulsa Doom's two lieutenants, Thorgrim and Rexor. One majorly important element of this scene is the bit that plays after we cut away from said fight. We see Conan and his two companions escaping through the tunnel they snuck through earlier. The music accompanying the action is the final act of Riders of Doom, heralded by a powerful drum solo. This part of the song also plays during the opening scene. And it ends with a sinister series of horn notes. This will be important later. The final scene in which Riders of Doom plays is the film's climactic battle scene, the Battle of the Mounds. In this scene, the song reincorporates the more intense chorus and instrumentation of the opening scene, but is still slightly less powerful. It goes to show how a slight reduction can make the song go from sounding ominous and terrifying to heroic and epic. The most important thing, though, is this. Remember the drum beats that transitioned into the last part of the song before? They're not here. Instead, we get some excellent new material that plays during the rest of the battle when Conan and his buddy Subotai are dispatching the rest of Doom's men. As well as when Conan fights Thorgrim and Rexor for the final time. How come the ending of Riders of Doom plays the first 2 times we hear the song in the film, but not in this scene? Well, I have an answer for that question. The first time we hear the track in the movie, as well as its ending, what happens afterward? Thulsa Doom beheads Conan's mother. The second time we hear the song and its ending included, what happens afterward? Thulsa Doom kills Conan's love interest Valeria with a snake arrow. But the third time we hear the song, the ending is omitted, and not a single good guy dies during the whole scene. This isn't a coincidence. Every time you hear the ending section of Riders of Doom, it signals the death of someone close to the main character. So even during the ending of the orgy sequence where Conan and his friends rescue the princess, the music casts a sense of dread during the ending of that scene where Valeria kills more of Doom's henchmen. But during the Battle of the Mounds, it's almost as if our heroes have taken a hold of the film's score to use it as a weapon in addition with the many weapons they have on hand. One of the most common characteristics with orchestral film scores that are considered the best of all time is how the various themes and leitmotifs that the composers create evolve and change to fit the context of the story and in the process enhance it. Conan is no exception. It's little wonder then why the film's soundtrack has been rearranged and continues to be played at various live events to this very day. It's impossible to overstate how important to a film's experience a score can truly be. There are many more examples of how the film uses music in an unorthodox yet highly effective way, but I'd rather not give them away for all the people watching who haven't seen the movie, despite my earlier warning saying I'd be spoiling it rotten. All of these observations are not ones I made on my first viewing. I've seen this film more times than I can count. And for me, it only gets better with each viewing because of the amount of craft put into nearly every frame of it. It's very rewatchable, way more than you can say for the other Conan flicks. If you're a person who's seen this film, and you disliked it,
then to hell with you.
Just kidding. In all seriousness, though, I'm not exactly trying to change your mind. But one thing I hope I convinced you of in this video is that this is an amazing example of a film where every tiny last detail had thought put into it. Everything in this film, from the blocking to the cinematography to the music and its use, was done strategically and intentionally, because it was made by a filmmaker whose propensity for risk-taking was matched only by his love for surfing. I believe that is a good note to end on. But before I go, I wanted to have a final word with Thulsa Doom himself, Mr. James Earl Jones. Take us away, good sir.
It's going to be an important film. I'm not talking about how the critics receive it or how the box office receives it. It'll be a very important film because it is picking up a thread that we saw with Star Wars, very frankly. A thread of epic adventure. This is a thread that goes back to the past, but it's the same thread of epic adventure that all human beings are very anxious to see. Not for escape, because there are very important lessons you can learn about the past and the future, or a writer's imagination of those times. But that's the importance, is epic drama. Being from the stage and loving Shakespeare, I think I can compare it, not in terms of literature or dramaturgy to Shakespeare, but in terms of size.